Welcome to the Standing Committee on Crown and Central Agencies. My name is Terry Dennis. I'm the chair of the committee. And with us today we have Trent Weatherspoon filling in for Erica Ritchie. We have Tim McLeod filling in for Steve Bonk, Daryl Harrison, Terry Jensen, Greg Lawrence, and Dana Skorpat. Today we will be considering the estimates and supplementary estimates of number 2 for the Ministry of Finance, including 2022-2023 estimates, Vote 18, Finance, Vote 12, Finance Debt Servicing, Vote 151, Municipal Financing Corporation, Vote 175, Debt Redemption, Vote 176, Sinking Funds Payments, Government Share, Vote 177, Interest on Gross Debt, Crown Enterprise Share, 2021-22 Supplementary Estimates number 2, Vote 151, Municipal Financing Corporation, Vote 175, Debt Redemption. We will begin with Vote 18, Finance, Central Management and Services Subvote F101, FI01. Minister Harpauer is here with her officials. As a reminder to the officials, please state your name for the record before speaking and do not touch the microphones. Hansard operators will turn your microphone on when you're ready to speak. Minister, please introduce your officials and give your opening comments.
Mr. Chair, committee members, thank you to talk about the ministry's budget today. To my left is Rupen Pandya, the Deputy Minister of Finance, and then I have a number of other officials with me here today. And as you pointed out, they will introduce themselves when they help to address some of the members' questions. The Ministry of Finance estimates, Vote 18, appears on pages 51 to 55 of the estimates book. The Ministry of Finance expense budget for 2022-23 is $376.6 million, an increase of $8.4 million or 2.3% from 21-22. Our ministry's expense budget for this year includes the following increases: $8.1 million for pensions and benefits, $3 million for the fuel charge program, $900,000 and 9 FTEs for new audit and tax collection initiatives, $625,000 for salary adjustments resulting from the collective bargaining agreements, $500,000 for the allowance for doubtful accounts, and $299,000 for enterprise IT billing and accommodation, and $1,000 for the minister's salary. Those increases are partially offset by a $5 million decrease related to the completion of the Small Business Emergency Payment and the Tourism Sector Support Program. And the ministry's budget includes $3.7 million in government-owned capital, which includes IT systems for the fuel charge program and the real-time validation system upgrade and the Treasury Management IT system upgrade. Mr. Chair, allow me to elaborate on some of the highlights of our ministry's budget in the context of our province's 22-23 budget, which shows clearly that Saskatchewan is back on track. Our province's finances are vastly improved. We have a fiscal plan to return to the budget to balance. Our province's economy is growing past pre-pandemic levels as we protect lives and livelihoods through the end of the pandemic. The Ministry of Finance's 22-23 budget operating expense of $62.7 million supports the guidance, accountability, and expertise related to the management of the province's finances. Our ministry plays a pivotal role in ensuring our government's fiscal plan achieves government's priorities for the people of Saskatchewan. This means our ministry ensures valued services, programs, and capital investments are sustainable today and into the future. Our ministry's budget includes $2 million in capital for system implementation and $3 million for administration of the program, pending the outcome of the provincial federal disclosures, and that program is the sort of placeholder that we have in the budget for the federal fuel charge program. We are carefully managing our ministry finances, offsetting expenses and additional revenue collected through several measures related to fair taxation. Our budget includes $900,000 in new funding directed to initiatives focused on greater contract compliance and enhanced collection and audit activities. And through the Public Employees Benefit Agency, or PEBA, Finance's budget includes an increase in pension and benefit expense representing employers' contributions to government employees, judges, and members of the Legislative Assembly. $313.9 million is forecast for employers' pension and benefit contributions, an increase of $8.1 million from last year based on actual values and compensation rate values. Mr. Chair, this is a very quick snapshot of the work that people at Saskatchewan's Ministry of Finance undertake throughout each year. The women and men in finance work hard to serve their many clients in and outside of government. And at this time, I'd be happy to take the questions.
Thank you, Minister, for your opening statement. So we'll now open it up to questions. Mr. Witherspoon.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you, committee members. Thank you to all the leadership and all the officials from finance here today, and for all their leadership throughout the year. Thank you, Minister, for being here as well. Just before we get started, I just want to recognize the life and service on the record of Mr. Arun Srinivasan. I know he earned the respect of all of his colleagues in the civil service. He earned the respect of those on all sides of this assembly, and he has a legacy that lives on. And just want to send our care to his family and all those that loved Mr. Srinivasan. Moving on a bit here, maybe where we'll focus first is I wouldn't mind getting a better sense of what the federal transfers look like this year. I know we've got kind of the bigger numbers reported here by way of the health transfer and the social transfer, and then there's the other item. And so I'm looking to see if we can get some detail on what's captured there and what's included in that list of other and the value for each.
Great, thank you. Thank you for the question. I'll maybe start with the Canada Health Transfer, and I'll give you budget over budget differences if that would be useful for you. So 22-23 budget, the Canada Health Transfer is $1.390 billion, and the 21-22 budget for Canada Health Transfer is $1.3304 billion. Canada Social Transfer, just moving on, 22-23, $490.1 million, and in 21-22 is $477.4 million. Just other transfers, and this notes equalization. Obviously, we don't receive equalization in Saskatchewan, so just for the record, I would note that in 22-23 that is $1.339.6 billion, and in 21-22 it was $1.1007 billion.
No, thank you very much. So it's more the detail. I have those numbers there. That's appreciated. To break out the other, can you describe with some detail what constitutes other, the different tranches of funding there and the value for each?
Sure. So, tell if that's okay then. So for 21-22 forecast, I noted it's up $496.6 million. It includes $287 million increase to the GRF, and that's primarily for $124.1 million increase for Saskatchewan's share of Helping Our Health Systems Recover program. Oh, sorry, that's 21-22, pardon me. I was just, let me just jump to 22-23 if you don't mind. Awesome. There you go. Thanks, Brent. Okay, correction. So for 22-23 budget, there is $156.5 million decrease, and this is due to $124.1 million decrease to one-time funding received in 21-22 for Saskatchewan's share of the Helping Our Health Systems Recover. That was one-time federal funding that dropped off. There's a $62.6 million decrease in one-time top-up funding received in 21-22 for the Canada Community Building Fund, and that's formerly the gas tax program. There's a $31 million decrease for one-time funding received in 21-22 for Saskatchewan's share of the COVID-19 immunization plan. There's $25.8 million decrease in one-time top-up funding received in 21-22 for the Workforce Development Agreement and Immigration and Career Training. There's $13.2 million decrease in federal disaster assistance. There's a $10.7 million decrease in the Building Canada Fund, and that's a provincial territorial infrastructure component. There's a $9.6 million decrease in Airport Capital Assistance Program funding at highways, and that's related to lower eligible expenditures. There's a $9.3 million decrease for the Canada Health Accord. There's a $9 million decrease for the Saskatchewan Public Safety Agency, and that's related to one-time funding received in 21-22 for safe voluntary isolation programming. There's $7.8 million decrease for one-time funding received in 21-22 for COVID-19 Safe Restart funding, and that was for data management initiatives. There's $7.3 million decrease in funding under the National Trade Corridors funding at highways as the program winds down. $6 million decrease in funding at the Ministry of Social Services for Indigenous Services Canada. There's $4.9 million decrease at the Ministry of Agriculture for the Saskatchewan Crop Insurance Corporation Administration. $4 million decrease for the Safe Return to Classrooms, and that's the indoor air funding. And there's a $4 million decrease at social services for the special allowances for children care funding. And that's offset by $140.5 million increase for Saskatchewan's share of the early learning and childcare agreement, and $17.1 million increase in funding for the accelerated site closure program, and this is consistent with expected activity under the program. And there's a $5.2 million increase in agriculture in the Growing Forward 2 program funding, and a $10 million net increase in all other GRF federal provincial cost sharing agreements.
Thank you very much. Once these, these dollars are deployed or through the various ministries and organizations, how does the Ministry of Finance keep track of their utilization or their deployment at that point?
Each ministry would be keeping track of their own budgets, so then they report to finance. And I'd like to point out, because the federal government, of course, had a recent announcement just before their budget on the surgical initiative. That's not in our budget, because our budget was already introduced, so you'll see that in Q1.
As far as the breakdown you've provided for the current year, I appreciate that very much. How would you be able to report out to the public or to us with respect to the different the funding that was delivered last year and the utilization or the subscription of that funding in each of the ministries?
It would depend on which funding pool you were interested in. For example, the gas tax, it would be an allocation to the municipalities, but it flows through our budget. For the infrastructure programs, again, you would see that through the projects, and many of them are provincially shared in the cost, so you would see that through the projects. So it depends which program you want to see.
No, I appreciate that. And there's nowhere in the budget that details all of these items. Am I correct in that? All the federal, all the items that are contained within other?
No.
Allocated to ministries as well.
So you would see it, because it's allocated to the respective ministries. So in the case of the, I'm going to use the Building Canada Fund, for example, you would see that in the GR budget. The gas tax, you see that in the GR budget, is where that would be reflected.
I appreciate that. With respect to last year, I'm wondering if you'd be able to, and maybe you're not in a position to provide the information today, or I'm wondering if you would endeavor to be able to provide it in the days to come, if you're not able to today, but what all the federal transfers were in the previous fiscal year, what ministries they flowed to, and what, of course, how it was utilized and what proportion of funds were dispersed and what amount were unspent.
Sure, like that would have been last year's estimates, and then, so you want to go back a budget year and start there?
Yeah. To get a better sense, because you have the federal transfers and they're there within the budget, so we're characterizing some of those here today. But then it's the piece around tracking that would be, so I would appreciate a tracking of the deployment of those dollars. Many of those dollars will be, fully utilized and will have been spent. Some of those dollars may or may not have been, and to have that detail attached to it would be helpful.
So that, all that information would be in public accounts when it's all completed. The year end is where you're going to see that information.
And it would need a deeper level of granularity.
So from that, will it detail and break out in that final accounting through public accounts? It'll record the revenues or the transfer that occurs. Will it then break out specifically? Obviously they're intended for a purpose. Those dollars, in many cases, will it break out then if those dollars were fully utilized?
They also have their annual reports, each of the ministries. Like, I don't think in the estimates for finance that we should be doing the estimates for every ministry, which is kind of what you're asking for, is for the accounting now for what goes to health and what goes, because the health transfer, that would be pretty onerous, nor is it necessarily dedicated to one thing. It goes into the health budget, which then is compensation and it's surgeries and it's medical procedures, et cetera. So it goes into their overall budget, and that is scrutinized on the floor of the Assembly through committee, as well as then public accounts, and they have annual reports. But it would be pretty onerous for finance to start to go into everybody's budgets when there is opportunity to do the scrutiny on those budgets.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Maybe I'm not clear what I'm looking for. I'm not looking for something that's a huge undertaking of as far as resources go. I suspect it's information that's tracked by government. What I'm trying to get a sense of is the subscription or utilization of those dollars, and what dollars might be unspent. I think the Canada Health transfer and the social transfer would be different because they're so broad. It's more some of the unique funding tranches. We've seen more of them in the last couple of years, obviously through the pandemic, and just sort of a reporting. And maybe you can point me to where that information's publicly available, but it does not seem to be tracked in that way. So I'm just wondering if a summary could be provided on these fronts.
Pick which transfers you're interested in, because some of them depends on the agreement with the federal government. Some of them we're allowed to carry forward a percentage amount, so it may or may not be spent in the given year, but we account for it that year. But with the agreement, it can be spent the following year. Most agreements with the federal government, if it's not spent, you have to return it. And so it is very rare for them to have a transfer to the provinces that they say, okay, if you don't spend it all, you can just keep it and do whatever you want with it. That's pretty unusual. I can't think of one where we don't have to spend it all.
Right. On
generally what we agree to.
Right. No, this is good. So I'm just wondering, though, that level of detail with respect to those other aspects of funding, is that something that you could have provided out as far as the deployment, the subscription of those dollars, what were spent? I guess that might also account for then if any dollars had to be returned.
I can almost say we have not had to return any dollars that I'm aware of, and I'm seeing my deputy minister agreeing with that. So we can give you the list that was read into the record, and what it was designated for is what it would have been spent on. So in the case of the child care dollars allocation, in that case, I do know in the agreement you can carry forward some of the money because provinces had concerns on whether or not they could actually expense it when it was a partial year when the agreement was signed. And so all provinces have that agreement of a carry forward of some of the dollars. The gas tax, as I pointed out before, is fully expensed to its intention. I forget what else was on the deputy minister's list as I read it off, but pretty much what it states it is what it was used for.
Okay, no, this, so there's no dollars that are returned out of from last fiscal year, and obviously you don't have intentions to return any dollars that are going to be received this year. So it's simply then the list that you're providing, the different dollars that are delivered through the various ministries, and then there might be some distinction as to whether there's a carryover in some programs, some ministries, and that depends on the agreement and utilization by your government.
Correct, and not, I'm trying to think of another one. The accelerated site closure, I think, was again allocated, but it had a number of years that you could expense it in. But most programs is 1 year or it's gone.
So the Deputy Minister read a list for the year ahead. I appreciated that detail that he offered. Would it be appropriate to ask for that list along with the list for the previous year then? Because and then just a point of clarity, if the dollars, I guess, were carried forward. So if they weren't fully utilized, because you've clarified that if 21 million is dedicated through ministry such and such for such and such program, that those are going to be, that those were fully utilized, they wouldn't have been, otherwise they would have been returned. So you would just identify if, in the cases that they need to be carried forward into what amount.
Just to clarify, you want the list for 21-22, and we would have the complete list now because the full fiscal year has taken place. And what they were allocated for, and then the list for what we're projecting for this year, knowing that the federal government may, as they already have done for the surgical lead times. Yeah.
No, that's exactly what I'm looking for, and I appreciate that. And we've seen these federal dollars, the surgical dollars that sort of came post-budget. Are we anticipating other dollars at this point, or are you aware of other dollars from the federal government with respect to new transfers?
We don't know yet for the housing dollars that were announced in the federal budget. We have absolutely no details on those dollars or if it will be, any of it will be transferred to the provinces. Generally, the federal government has taken us by surprise, and they have not given us very much heads up on their funding announcements. I know the surgical wait list announcement, I don't think there was any heads up.
I was going to touch in on it later in the estimates here, but since we're talking a bit about the surgical dollars, I just want to get a sense of the situation there. In this budget, how much are you providing in incremental funding to the SHA to address the surgical backlog?
Within the budget, we put an additional 20 million, 20.1, I believe it was, on top of what is already internally in the budget.
Okay, and then we've talked a little bit about then the federal transfer that has been announced since the budget, the ink would have dried. Can you advise us the amount of money that you presently expect to receive from the federal government in 2022-23 and 2023-24 on that front?
For 23 is 62 million, or is that over 2 years?
For surgical rate.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's for 20.
It was Saskatchewan's allocation from that announcement is 62 million.
And that's for the current fiscal year. That's flowing in fully for
Right,
22,
and
23.
that's what you're going to see reflected on Q1.
And will the government be providing all that incremental funding to the SHA in 22, 23 for the 62 million in addition to the budget, then I would assume?
It'll go into the health budget.
And so it'll go into health, and I think there's been some discussion about how those dollars would then be used. Do you know if those dollars will be fully dedicated to addressing the surgical backlog, or if they're required to do so by way of the agreement?
Question for health.
Okay. Thanks so much. And with respect to the federal, just to make sure I have the understanding, you're able to provide to us either tonight or at some point in the coming days the breakout that we were talking about on the federal transfers that we were.
Yeah, the list of what is other and what it's transferred to us for. We can give a brief sentence or two explanation as well.
I'd like to get a little bit of an update on just the revenue collection. Some of it's detailed and broken out, and we can see where those dollars are derived, and others we can't. And I just want to, I've been doing some tracking over the last number of years on the PST front, and I'm looking for some updates here with respect to some of the PST changes over the last number of years and what sort of revenue each one of them are generating. What they're forecast to in this current fiscal. If you know your latest estimate, I don't know if you have the unaudited statements yet or if you're drawing off the third quarter yet at this point, but your best estimate for the year we just closed. But can we just go through a few of those? Children's clothes, restaurant meals, construction, insurance, and used cars. Just looking for a breakout on those.
So in 2019-20 is the last stats I have. I think the last update you had was 18-19. Right, and so the 19-20, PST in construction is 400 million. PST on restaurant meals and snack foods is 102 million, 102. PST on vehicle trade-in allowance, I've got 0.
In the used cars, or on the trade-in
Right.
allowance, but on the used cars, the PST that was added to used cars as well.
I don't know whether we would know that. I don't have that one in front of me. I've got PST on children's clothes is 16.8 million.
Is that from 18? That's the 18-19 number that I have here, unless or is that 19-20?
It's the same number.
It's the same number.
It's the same number, yeah.
Insurance?
Is what I have. Insurance, I have same number too, 121.9.
Okay, so that's 19-20. Can we get updates for, if possible, for 2021, 21-22, and then the current
We wouldn't have
forecast?
them totaled yet, would we? Hasn't been completed yet, so we will get that when we can.
And that's for the 2 previous fiscal years, as well as the forecast for this year. You don't have updated numbers that you're in a position to be able to share at this point, is that? If you're able to, you've expressed a willingness to undertake to get that information back. Is that something that can be provided in a matter of days or
Probably.
weeks, or I want to be reasonable with your team?
Deputy Minister tells me they will try to be as fast as they can, but they don't know how long it's going to take to break it all out.
Sure. Well, thank you for that information. And within that, then, you'd have sort of forecasts for this year, I would assume, as well, for the current fiscal year?
Same process.
Okay. And you said that you didn't have used cars in front of you there. The last number I had on used cars was 95 million. Is that number correct? That was for 18-19. Is that number accurate? I actually have it in my chart here. I think I've got it for 1920. I'm not sure if I have 95, I believe, as well.
They'll check on that breakout as well.
And then the trade-in allowance that you identified, just help me understand what was represented there.
I had to revisit that one because that's been a while since I worked on it. So you're taxed on the difference between your trade-in and your new vehicle. So if you purchased a $60,000 vehicle, for example, and you had no trade-in, you would pay tax on the full $60,000. If you had a $20,000 trade-in, you would pay tax on the $40,000. And then when the trade-in is sold, it is taxed. So that's when the tax is collected on the remainder of that $60,000.
Right. Oh, it makes sense.
Okay.
I think it makes sense. So thanks for, and it doesn't show up as a, there's no dollars dedicated in that
Right, because
fiscal
it would be
year.
the vehicle sales tax. And it's all together. We don't separate it or get the dealerships to separate it out.
I won't get in at this point with respect to the, we're well on the record where we stand on the increases that have occurred here and the concern and the hardship that it's, brought for people, and it's hurt for local businesses and our economy as well. I want to move along to where we see some quite a few new taxes being imposed in the budget. I'm wondering what consultation took place with stakeholders, specifically in the fitness, arts, and culture, sports, and recreation sector.
So generally, with provincial sales tax, there wasn't a consultation per se. It was a harmonization, which is what is done in many provinces. Of course, these particular entities would already be taxed with both GST and PST because it's harmonized. The consultation would be fairly easy to do in that you would say, we are considering tax. They'd say, we don't want to have PST applied even if GST is. So we know the answer to the question. And I don't think with PST there's ever been consultation.
I mean, we've discussed these to some end. This is a time, and these are sectors that are really hurting right now, the hardest hit in many ways if you look at the last couple of years, and so important as well to communities, local businesses, and places to gather and bring people together. And so it just sort of defies common sense to hit them at a time where they're really working to recover. And if you look at the amount that's being collected, I think there has to be question about whether the juice is worth the squeeze here, because it's not a whole lot of money that's collected in a broad sense for the budget, but it's real impacts for organizations and local businesses and families who are hit with those costs. Was there, I think of gyms for an example, I think of all these, but gyms that have really been struggling. Was there any economic analysis done before this hike or this imposition of the PST was brought forward?
As I said, this is not unique just to Saskatchewan. A number of provinces, of course, have harmonized tax on these entities. And, we're not hearing that because of the tax in Ontario, for example, there is less user of gymnasiums or any of these venues. So we've got those examples in our nation. We can't, of course, compare it to Alberta that has no PST on anything. So that we found when we expanded the PST base prior in the 2017-18 budget, restaurant meals, for example, recovered very, very quickly, and I know there was no cry by yourself and others that this was going to devastate restaurants. And in fact, they recovered very quickly, and then, of course, were devastated by the pandemic. But for sure, all decisions are not easy to make, but there is a number of increases, and I think we will be continuing to increase in a number of areas in healthcare and in education, and the money has to come from somewhere. And although I hear criticism from yourself and your colleagues, I don't hear the alternative. I've never heard the alternative, other than taxing the rich, which is a very short-sighted I think, policy as well.
Again, you connect to so many points of pride in organizations and businesses that are important to communities across Saskatchewan at a time where they've been on their knees and are doing all they can to either reopen, doors, keep doors open, hold events again, and to suggest, I think, that imposing a tax at a time where inflation's through the roof and folks are struggling and they're facing a crushing cost of living, to suggest that it's not going to change consumer behavior, I think is naive. And, there's a lot of folks that are stressed right now about, the price at the pumps and the food bill and all the other inflationary pressures in their life. Wages pretty flat. And so there's a real worry out there when you think of the fitness industry and the gym industry, likely something that we should be encouraging if we're actually to take a sense of how we're to improve health and even our fiscal health as a province in the end, if we can encourage a healthier population. These are the kinds of things that we should support. So the justification that we should harmonize them because the feds are taxing them, my goodness, I just don't think that holds water. I guess to that end, I mean, as far as the whole harmonization, this is something that, I think clearly Saskatchewan people aren't interested in. They're not interested in this new tranche of harmonization that they see here right now. They're certainly not interested in further harmonization. I think that what we would want to see is a rollback, of what's been brought forward here. But what are the minister's intentions around further harmonization? Where does the minister stand on harmonization?
We're on record for not agreeing to full harmonization.
So, when you expand the list of services and, the way that we see here this year, we're getting closer and closer to having, real harmonization on the sales tax, GST and the PST. And then there's some places, of course, that the provincial government even goes further and is attaching the PST where the GST isn't attached as well. My question is, so I guess with respect to gas and electricity, these are things that are so costly already. There's a concern with folks when they see harmonization. Do you make a full commitment to not be expanding further harmonization in places like gas and electricity or any other fronts, or can we expect in the years to come this incremental, or in this case this year, substantial harmonization like we've seen?
What's obviously not substantial, as you just pointed out yourself, it was not a lot of, a huge revenue generator. And I've not had one person in the number of chambers that I've met with over the budget in my constituency office or in my office here in Regina, of one person that's raised a concern over complete harmonization or think that that's where it's going. So you were the first person to say it, and hopefully you're not going to go and publicly try to generate that fear, because it is just simply not on.
Well, no, the concern is the harmonization that we continue to see by your government. We see that in this budget, and the question was, it's problematic to what we see already, and while the amount...
I would caution you to get you to line your questioning and with the estimates, and please move on.
They certainly are. The question was on the new taxes, the harmonization that we're discussing here.
You're questioning the future of expansion, and I don't think that's part of the estimates, so please move on.
So is there no, with respect to further harmonization, is your answer that there be no further harmonization moving forward?
I've answered that question, and I've said that harmonization is not in our discussion, and we are on record of saying we will not harmonize.
And any more incremental harmonization as we see in this budget?
What are you worried about? Because what's left?
So identified gas and electricity. There's other goods as well, and certainly
harmonization.
And then the province, of course.
Harmonization.
The province taxes areas that the federal government don't, or that they don't tax as well. So there's those pieces. So just to make sure we're focusing directly on the pieces there. Could you provide a so the 20 million isn't a large sum for the budget, but it's impactful for somebody who's trying to pay the bills and go to a Rider game or go to the gym, or could you break out just the list and provide us a list on the amounts, the value of what's forecast to be received for each of the areas that the PST has been imposed this year?
No, it is a broad estimate at this point in time.
Okay. And the broad estimate, it's that 21 million. So you're not able to break down sporting events or concerts or shows or rodeos or craft shows or...
No. There will be very few craft shows impacted because very few are of the magnitude that they have an admission fee. And so small towns actually will be very little impacted because they don't have venues or craft shows that GST apply to.
So just, yeah, maybe just make sure that, can you detail, because there's lots of questions as to what this will apply to or not out through the community. I know your office is fielding questions on this front. Mine is as well, and I, connect them with officials. So what is, what's the threshold that causes this new PST to be imposed on these events?
If they fall into the threshold for GST, they will for PST, which is why we chose that, because of the simplicity of it, and it answers all of the questions so that we don't get flooded with, am I in or out? If you are not required to pay GST, you are not required to pay PST.
In the GST, so it's triggered, by the GST, it's the same rules there. Can you describe what causes the GST to apply or not apply to events like the rodeos and craft shows and sporting events?
So I'm being told that the federal rules is if it's a business and the sales revenue is less than $30,000 annually, they do not have to register for GST. And if it's a public service body, that annual revenue is anything less than $50,000 doesn't have to register for GST.
So now, something that's a not-for-profit, can you describe how not-for-profits will be treated or distinguished? Are you able to at least break out what the some of these are attached to the entertainment, the different aspects that I've identified here. But what about gym memberships itself? Would you have that number or what that target would be, the forecast?
We don't.
We don't have to debate in this committee the matters that we've debated on the floor and will continue to, but certainly it's been a big concern to see the new imposition on this front, the harmonization on this front, and the PST imposed on these hard-hit sectors. Is there any consideration at this point? I know lots of folks have reached out to express their concerns, lots of organizations, lots of communities. Is there a consideration in walking back even a portion of or some elements of these new taxes?
Talked to some cinema groups and to some gymnasium groups, and they often are a member of a national organization or business, and the discussion was of them working with the federal government of having them removed there, in which case it would automatically be removed provincially as well.
Right, and now what about the actual imposition into these other areas? Is there any consideration of walking back some of these? You think of that gym membership one and some of the community events that are going to be impacted.
So we continue to build the economy, and as the province recovers and strengthens, and I am very optimistic of that, with there being almost $14 billion of private investment now coming into our province. With each and every budget process, we look at the entire suite of revenues, and that includes the entire suite of taxation. And we have those discussions each and every year of of whether or not we're in the position financially to walk them back in order to still sustain and maintain going forward our expenses that are also equally important when it comes to the services that the government provides to the people. So that discussion is ongoing on all fronts. You know, can we walk back at some point in time? PST entirely back to 5% on everything that PST, you know, applies to. That would be truly great, and it would be a sign that we now have a strong enough economy and a stable enough tax base in order to have those conversations. So that is a, you know, a budget deliberation that happens each and every year. Each and every year, the possibilities there for each and everything. But it does depend on the revenue projections for that year, because we don't want to put at risk what we're also investing into healthcare, education, safety nets, and protection of people and property.
Real difficult time for the economy, difficult time for people. Inflation that's never, well, hasn't been, you know, this high since 1991, 5.7% over this last year. Folks, you know what they're paying at the pumps, and you know, they know what the impacts are for food. And at the same time, the province, of course, is experiencing the a revenue windfall at this, you know, in face of this extraordinary situation. So it's just, you know, I can't express my disappointment enough with the direction and the choices here to impose these taxes and cause that sort of hardship and economic impacts that are negative at a time where we should be supporting folks. My question with respect to this choice, did you do an assessment, or did folks do an assessment? They said they didn't do an economic analysis. Was there an assessment of the job levels and then the job loss in these sectors throughout the pandemic?
No, that's not the job of the Finance Ministry to do job loss assessments. But I do want to point out something that I do understand, that we're in an inflationary time period, as is every other province across our country, as is many countries globally. But decisions have been made, and it goes back to what I said, with each and every budget, we make decisions on what we are fiscally able to do at that time. So the interesting thing is, you know, in British Columbia, which is, of course, an NDP government, you start paying tax after you make, you know, anything more than $11,302. In Saskatchewan, that's $16,615. I think if the residents of Saskatchewan had a choice of PST on their gym membership or an additional over $5,000 more in income tax, I think they would choose the PST on the gym membership. Let's go to Manitoba. Manitoba, you start paying tax at $10,000. Ontario, $11,000, which also has PST on gym memberships. New Brunswick, $10,817, who also pays PST on their gym memberships. I think that the citizens of Saskatchewan would rather have $16,615 clear in their pocket that they get to keep and spend, and they will pay that PST on the gym membership. So you're implying that we do nothing to help with affordability, which couldn't be farther from the truth. If you go through the list of supports, and that's not counting our income assistance programs, that is supports for people not on income assistance, by having one of the lowest personal income tax in the country, by having a low income tax credit for those that don't even pay income tax, by increasing our seniors income plan, by having the Saskatchewan housing benefit, the active families benefit, the disability tax credit, the caregiver tax credit, the first-time home buyers tax credit, the home renovation tax credit, the graduate retention program, the Saskatchewan Advantage Scholarship. We're going to have an SGI rebate of $100. The amount of home health services that we subsidize or cover, including having one of the best seniors drug plan and children's drug plan in the country, And that is over $2 billion of foregone revenue or direct payments to help with affordability. We also have the second lowest utility bundle in the country, and we significantly decreased the EPT. So I understand that no one wants to pay GST on their gym membership. I understand that. But if the alternative is then an increase to any of the others, most citizens will say, I will pay $5,000 less in income tax, and I will pay PST on my gym membership.
We'll get into some of those other amounts later on, but again, this is a time where there's windfall revenues, there's extraordinary pressures that folks are facing, crushing cost of living, you know, a real, you know, once in a generation sort of an experience that families are facing. So it just defies common sense to further pile on with the taxes. We know that the PST, of course, now it's the biggest tax hike in Saskatchewan's history that's been brought forward from 2017 and now added to in this budget. So it's a real concern for folks. But I guess with respect to these specific changes this year around entertainment and gyms, when were these increases first proposed, and you know, was anyone asking for this?
That's a ridiculous question. So it was proposed in the budget, and I have not had one person come to me in my entire lifetime that said, gee, can you raise my taxes? So it's a ridiculous question.
So the question, though, it's certainly, I think the point that it's being increased is most people would find to be ridiculous to that point. But back to the budget deliberations, when was the idea first proposed? And like, how did we get to this situation where we have gas prices at record highs for folks, this extraordinary situation, revenues through the roof for government, yet a government signing off on these tax increases? So I'm wondering, when were they proposed, and why was that, why was that plan not abandoned?
We do budget deliberations. We start at the end of September, I believe it is, and we work on the budget through October, November, December, January, February is the number of times that we meet, numerous times, but so to give you a date is irrelevant. That's when we do the budget deliberations.
Well, I'll just leave my disappointment on the record. I think that governments have a duty to respond to the realities that they're facing, that folks are facing, and we have a pretty dynamic time now, an extraordinary situation that our world faces. And it's, cost of living was already such an impact for Saskatchewan people. But, what we've seen since that unforgivable invasion in Ukraine is created, just terrible hardship, economic hardship for people. And it defies common sense that a government wouldn't adjust to the extraordinary situation and step back at that point. I'll leave it there because I'm well on the record on that front. And, and just to remind folks that, the dollars are there. The other consequence of some of this is that we have windfall revenues. We can get into that a little bit later. But I'll shift along a little bit here if I can. And maybe if we look, I'd be interested in getting a profile of our current debt. Maybe first of all, if we can just touch on the debt servicing costs. I know there's the accounting for it within the budget on the GRF. What is if you could break out the debt servicing costs sort of across government then as well for the crowns and for P3s, just to make sure we have a full capture of debt servicing costs for all of government.
While I wait for the officials to gather that information, I'm not sure we have the type of detail you're looking for, but I just want to remind people that are watching that your party called for us to do what Alberta did, which is to remove the fuel tax. And Alberta is taking their fuel tax off for 3 months. And if you consumed 150 litres per month, the saving for the driver over 3 months is $58.50. And Ontario also reduced their fuel tax by 5.7 cents for 6 months. And if those drivers consumed 150 litres a month, the saving to those drivers over 6 months is $51.30. In Saskatchewan, we're giving a $100 rebate to all drivers. So I think, again, if you had the choice of having the $58.50 savings in Alberta, assuming that you burn 150 litres per month, which many people don't, or $100, which is what the Saskatchewan government's doing. I think the choice would be very clear. In my mind, I would take the $100 and rather than the $58.50 that your party was asking for, which was to do what Alberta's doing.
Yeah, so maybe a bit of detail there. We were using Alberta as an example. This government has options on this front and how you would build a program. So we, certainly I think there's better ways to build a program as well. And if you look at the fuel tax that's going to be collected, $513 million. We had called for either a cancellation of the fuel tax for a 3-month period, or for those dollars, the collection to be rebated to Saskatchewan people, where you could build a program and you'd have over $100 million to discharge. Your government chose not to act on this front, but folks certainly are facing those costs. We can go further if there's some possibility of finally getting some fuel relief for folks. We can get into that. Of course, on the SGI piece, this is something we've called for and pushed for, because those are Saskatchewan people, those are drivers' dollars, and SGI is an exceptional Crown corporation, well managed, and it's an example of the benefit of all of our Crowns, but that Crown and the value that it provides folks. So certainly the rebate back to Saskatchewan people with respect to SGI is an important one, but the relief around fuel is something that stands and that I would continue to urge your government to consider each day that WTI and WCS are where they're at by way of oil price, is providing windfalls of revenues for this government. And the same can be said across the resource sector right now, and that's a good thing. But what Saskatchewan people and producers are experiencing is, record prices at the pumps, really high inputs, and we'll continue to press for the relief. But back to the question there, I'm interested in getting a breakout in the total debt servicing costs of all of government, including Crown corporations and P3s. Thank you.
So thanks for the question. So maybe I'll start with the fact that the budget document, the budget policy document, the White Book, will note that debt servicing costs are $812,048 million. For GRF financing charges, as per estimates, it's $622 million. And then there is some consolidation adjustments related to General Revenue Fund that net out about $16.4 million. And the pension adjustments, $173.153 million. So the adjusted General Revenue Fund debt picture is $778.975 million. And I'll just try to give you a bit of a breakdown of that 622. So it tries to answer your question about the components of debt. So Vote 12 finance debt servicing charges are $580.9 million. Vote 16 highways and infrastructure is $25,021,000. Vote 5 education is $7.845 million. Vote 32 is health, that's $7.024 million. And vote 13 is SAS bills and procurement, which is $1.432 million. So that totals that $622.222 million as per estimates. So there is some other consolidation adjustments related to other interest paid on our SEIC joint banking arrangement, et cetera, that nets out, resulting in adjusted GRF financing charges of $605.822 million. Crown Corporation financing charges are, because of Public Sector Accounting Board standards, are consolidated as net income into our financial statements. So the Crowns operate under a set of financial standards called IFRS, and they consolidate into the provincial summary financial statements as just a net income number. So they're netted out as part of that process.
Thank you very much for the breakout of the information, and just to confirm if you can provide the total debt servicing costs this year, and then provide what it was last year, just.
It's on page 57, vote 12.
Sorry. So thanks for the amount here. Now, I heard there were some other amounts shared by the Deputy Minister that, the budget book, of course, shows the 580 on vote 12, 580 million is 515 million. So if the Deputy Minister or the Minister can just provide some clarity on the other numbers that were provided.
Fine. So thanks. So I think the Minister already responded to the first part of your question, which is vote 12 was 580.9 million. I think you found that. Vote 16 is on, starts on page 71 of the estimates, and the amount is 25,021 million, and I'll just try to itemize that for you here, although you could find it. I'm going to ask my colleagues to help out a little bit just to track down the numbers inside of estimates for you. Thanks. Sorry, it just took me a minute. It's on page 74. If you take a look at classification for type under operation of the transportation system, which is highways 10, financing charges are listed there as 25021. That's consistent with the information I just shared with you. I can continue if you'd like me to continue with that itemization out of the estimates. Where those financing
that would be helpful, and what our number would have been for last year as for the total.
Last year's estimates book would have all these numbers, and you have it.
It would have the forecast for the year. So just doing a comparative.
So
on
the
vote
final
12.
numbers, the end of the year-end final numbers are in public accounts, which also is something that you have.
It won't be published yet for last year, so I guess.
In fairness, the officials work on gathering year-end
Right.
numbers, and so that is what public accounts is all about, is for those final year-end numbers, and that is available to all members. So I would suggest you stick as much as possible to the estimates in this particular budget, and when you have public accounts is totally available to you, which will be the final numbers for last year's.
Is the, so just looking then to make sure I understand, so because we see a significant increase in debt servicing costs this year, if you're looking at $65 million increase year over year on, a total cost of just over $500 million. I guess the question would be, is there that same kind of increase on those other, debt servicing costs as well?
To answer that question. So certainly the increase in debt servicing costs will be linked to both the amount of borrowing and the rate at which that borrowing is facilitated. So with respect to votes 16, 5, 32, 13, which were highways, education, health, SAS, bills, procurement, those are all part of financing charges related to long-term contracts, and so they won't be subject to the same inflationary pressure that we're seeing with respect to other debt servicing costs. So hopefully that answers your question.
No, I appreciate the that information. Can you profile what the interest rate assumptions are in the 2022 financing program with respect to 5, 10, and 20-year borrowings?
Great. So the assumptions in the budget paper are 0.5 for short-term debt and 2.75 for term debt, which is essentially a 10 and 30-year debt.
Thank you for that information. Can you please advise the amount of new borrowings versus the amount of refinancing of past borrowings coming due in this fiscal year 22-23?
So total borrowing is 3,521.7 billion, and refinancing is 664.6 million of that total. Yeah, it's not in addition.
Right. No, thank you for the total, and thank you for the aspect that's the refinancing. With respect to the past borrowing, so the those that are coming due and that are going to be refinanced, can you tell us the interest rate on each of the past borrowing that you'll need to refinance? For this, I guess the 664, I think, was the number that you provided.
So I'll ask Rod Balkwell, who's the Executive Director of Treasury Management Branch, to just come up and join me, and you can try to get into some detail if there is detail, but I'd like to maybe just answer generally that because of the steep decline in interest rates that we've seen over the course of the last number of years, that almost all of our term debt has been refinanced at lower rates, and so we've got off of double-digit debt down to single-digit debt, and single-digit interest rates. And so I think maybe I'll just get you to sit down and answer that question if you can.
Thank you for the question. I'm Rod Balkwell, Executive Director of Treasury Management Branch. We can get you the details of the bonds that are maturing and the coupon interest that was attached to those bonds. We don't have it handy at the moment, but as Rupen said, they are coming off their historic bonds that were at higher interest rates and are being refinanced at 2.75 to 3% interest rates.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much for that. I really appreciate if you're able to undertake to provide that information back. It's useful to track and informative. So if you're able to provide then the breakout of complete breakdown of all the individual borrowings that comprise total government debt that are coming due this current fiscal year and the interest rates that they currently hold, and as well that come due starting in 23-24, so into the next fiscal year. And if you can, within that, just identify what tranche of debt we're talking about, the source of the borrowing, the term of the debt, the due date, you know, and who's responsible for the debt, in executive government or a self-supporting Crown, and then of course the interest rate. If we're able to receive that, that would be really appreciated.
You can do that.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. Over the last couple of years, obviously, it's been a challenged couple of years with the pandemic as well, and I know we've canvassed, you know, questions around liquidity and access to debt markets. Can you give us a bit of an update as to the current situation and where things are headed for the province of Saskatchewan on this front?
When you get take it away.
Okay. Thank you for the question. So in regards to the current bond markets and the ability to finance, I'll maybe go back to last year when we spoke about the pandemic and the freeze that happened in capital markets, and that impacted almost every entity that was borrowing money, and every province was affected by that. So that was relatively or extremely severe, but relatively short-lived, as the Bank of Canada and other central banks stepped in to support markets, and provincial bonds were supported. So through most of fiscal 21-22, we were on recovery mode, and financing was relatively effective, but not back to where it was before the pandemic. In the current environment, we have seen more difficulty in financing as a result of really three aspects. You know, the pandemic not completely gone from our midst, and also, of course, the conflict in Ukraine has caused more impacts and nervousnesses in the markets. And I will comment that also central bank activity of raising interest rates has also thrown a bit of more difficulty to investors in terms of how they look at fixed income markets. So provinces in general, you know, if we wanted to grade it, it would be a 7 out of 10 in terms of their ability to finance. Saskatchewan is in a similar position in terms of going to market and financing. However, with recent upturn in revenues because of royalties, our borrowing needs have dropped off coming into the end of this year, and we are in a good liquid cash position at this point. So we have not accessed markets since the invasion occurred. Invasion occurred.
Ottenbright. I'll bug you in a second if you can. Hold on. Couple minutes. Thank you very much for, and I really appreciate both the landscape, the situation that we're facing, and your accounting of it and the commitment to get that other information back. You know, and it's you know, obviously we have a large borrowing program, you know, and it's a dynamic time on these fronts. What sort of I would assume that you're sort of assessing various interest rate scenarios right now when you're looking in sort of the forward-looking projections right now. Can you talk a little bit about what scenarios you're looking at and what those impacts are on the provincial budget?
Well, the obvious scenario that is in front of us and has been in front of us is rising interest rates, and we've seen interest rates go up 1%, 1 full percentage point in all terms of borrowing in the last 6 months as central banks have set on a tightening course. So that's the major headwind, and our analysis indicates that 100 basis point increase will cost an increase in vote 12 costs of some $32 million. And so, you know, borrowing more quickly is in some ways an obvious answer, but we don't know the path of interest rates completely. And so what we tend to do, or attempt to do, is borrow uniformly across the fiscal year to get the average rate. That said, we have built up larger liquidity funds to allow us to delay borrowing should interest rates spike in the short term. And that's a strategy that has been fairly effective. We've also not necessarily rise in interest rates, but a difficulty to fund should another shutdown in capital markets occur. With that scenario, we have increased our liquidity another $500 million to set aside in case of market inability to access markets and still be able to make our commitments. So those are you know, the main scenarios that we see: higher interest rates or the inability to borrow because investors are hesitant. We've also broadened out our investor base by accessing or developing programs to borrow in other currencies, including the US dollar, which is a very large and deep market, which will benefit our ability to fund.
Thanks again for the insight and the information. It's really appreciated. So with respect to debt right now, the forecast is to have debt increase by 2026-27 to $35 billion. And then, of course, we have substantial commitments that are, you know, required with respect to, I think, SAS Power specifically, right? And power generation needs and new power generations, you know, an expensive undertaking, and we have commitments that we need to be meeting as well. With respect to even the SMRs, which hold out a lot of promise on many fronts, certainly there needs to be questions, economic questions answered, you know, cost and other pieces. But right now it's forecast that an SMR would cost about 300 megawatt SMR is forecast to be about $5 billion. And so that's one, and if that's the road we go down, you probably need, you know, 4 of them. I'm not sure if we get into a place where those costs are going to be driven down as well. I guess just my question is around, as we look out into the not so distant future, you know, what impact would there be on our credit rating and the subsequent cost to access borrowing, to be adding that kind of borrowing into our program?
We're not answering the hypothetical into the future. That'll be decisions made as we move forward, because no decisions have been made on this front. It's
fair enough. I won't press the point, and it's not a matter of debate or anything here. It's more a matter of getting one's mind around those decisions, right? You see the debt increasing to the $35 billion, and then we know that we have power generation renewal and replacement that we need to take on. We have other investments that are going to be needed as well. But that decision sort of looms large, and just, you know, knowing that we can, you know, plan out what those impacts can be, and obviously making the most economic decisions on these fronts. I won't press further. I think it's an important area. I know your government will, you know, officials and others will be engaged on these sorts of considerations, because it's all coming down the pipe here fairly quickly. I don't think I have any other questions at this moment on. I might touch something back on some of the debt later on at some point, but I know folks were looking for a little break here as well. So thanks to officials for the answers on these fronts.
We'll now take a 15-minute break and reconvene at 5 p.m. Thank you.